the magical kingdom of Folkora, where snow covered the castles and forests with a white blanket, there lived a queen with a kind heart. Known for her kindness and inner beauty, she ruled with wisdom and compassion. A harsh winter had arrived, and on a particularly cold day, while sewing near an ebony-framed window, the queen pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of red blood fell onto the white snow that accumulated on the parapet. Observing the striking contrast, a deep desire was born in his heart. "Ah, if I had a daughter," sighed the queen, "with skin as white as this snow, lips as red as this blood, and hair as black as the ebony of this frame." His wish was granted. Soon a girl was born, as white as snow, with lips as red as rubies and hair the color of night. They named her Snow White. However, the queen's joy was brief. Shortly after the birth of her daughter, the kind queen passed away, leaving the kingdom and little Snow White in mourning. The kingdom of Folkora lost its brightest light, and winter seemed to have set in not only outside, but also in the hearts of the inhabitants. The snow continued to fall, silent and steady, like tears from heaven, as the castle was clothed in sadness for the loss of its beloved queen. After a period of mourning, the king, feeling the need for a mother for Snow White and a queen for his people, remarried. The new queen was imposingly beautiful, but her heart was cold and dark. Vanity was his greatest weakness, and envy his constant companion. He had a magic mirror, a mysterious object with an ethereal and deep voice, which he consulted daily. In a secluded corner of the castle, the queen stood before a mirror, her image reflected in flickering silver. With an imperious tone, he asked, "Magic mirror, my mirror, is there anyone more beautiful than me?" And the mirror, with its voice that echoed like the wind in a cave, always replied, "My queen, you are the most beautiful of all." These words fed the queen's ego, but her satisfaction was fleeting. As the years passed, Snow White grew, transforming into a young woman of rare beauty. Her grace and sweetness captivated everyone in the castle, and her youthful beauty began to overcome the queen's cold and artificial beauty. The stepmother, consumed by insecurity and jealousy, perceived Snow White's growing beauty as a threat to her dominance as the fairest in the kingdom. The magic mirror, silent witness to the queen's vanity, would soon bring news that would shake her perfect world of illusion. The atmosphere in the castle became dense, a harbinger of dark times for the young princess. One fateful day, the queen, overcome with fury and envy, asked her customary question in the mirror. "Magic mirror, my mirror, is there anyone more beautiful than me?" To her horror, the voice from the mirror resounded with a different response. "My queen, you are beautiful. It is true. But Snow White is now the fairest of them all." The queen's anger boiled over. His once beautiful face contorted into a mask of hatred. She called for a hunter, a man loyal to the kingdom but under her command. With a voice poisoned by anger, he ordered, "Take Snow White to the forest. Kill her and bring me her heart as proof of your obedience." The hunter, although obedient, had a noble heart. He had loved the princess since she was little, remembering her kindness when she once nursed her injured foot after a hunt. In the dark forest, as he prepared to carry out the cruel order, the huntsman saw the innocence in Snow White's eyes, her pleas for mercy, and remembered her kindness. The queen's wickedness contrasted sharply with the young woman's purity. Consumed by moral conflict, he was unable to carry out the order. "Run away, princess," he begged. "Flee deep into the forest and never come back. The evil queen wants your death." With a heavy heart, he killed a wild boar and took its heart to the queen, deceiving her and giving Snow White a chance to survive. Alone and terrified, Snow White entered the dense forest, aimlessly, just hoping to find refuge. The darkness of the forest surrounded Snow White. Every shadow seemed like a monster, every noise a threat. Tears streamed down his face as he ran aimlessly, branches scratching his clothes, fear squeezing his chest. Exhausted and desperate, she staggered through the trees until, through the foliage, she glimpsed a clearing. In the center, a charming little house, small and welcoming, seemed to glow softly. Cautiously, he approached. The house was even smaller than I had imagined, as if made for dolls. A carved wooden sign hanging on the door said, "Home Sweet Home." Inspired by a glimmer of hope, Snow White pushed the door open and entered. The interior was surprisingly tidy and cozy. Everything was small, but perfectly organized. A tiny table was set with 7 small plates, each with a piece of bread, a glass, and a fork. A fireplace crackled happily, illuminating the room with a warm, inviting light. In the corner, 7 little beds were lined up, covered with colorful quilts. Hunger was pressing, and tiredness dominated her. Without hesitation, Snow White tasted a little bread from each plate and took a sip from each glass. Then, seeking rest, he tried each of the beds until he found one that seemed softer. Sinking into the fluffy sheets, a sigh of relief escaped his lips. Within seconds, sleep overcame her, and Snow White fell soundly asleep, for the first time in hours feeling safe, sheltered in that small, magical refuge in the heart of the forest. The sun was beginning to set, as 7 little men returned home after a long day of work in the mountain mines. They were the 7 dwarves, each with their own quirk and distinct personality. Dunga, the youngest, always smiling, Achim, with his uncontrollable sneezing, Bashful, the most shy, angry, eternally grumpy, happy, radiating joy, Master, the wise and grumpy leader, always grumbling, but with a good heart. Singing in unison, they approached the house, ready for rest and dinner. When they opened the door, they noticed something different. The house, usually spotless, seemed slightly out of order. "Who was here?" asked Master, frowning. They noticed the dishes out of place and the beds untidy. With careful steps, they went to the bedroom, and there, sleeping soundly in one of the beds, they found Snow White. The dwarves stopped, mouths open, at the sight of the sleeping girl. Their faces lit up with surprise and wonder. "Look!" exclaimed Feliz, his eyes shining. "What an adorable creature," muttered Bashful, blushing slightly. Even Grumpy seemed momentarily less irritated, taking in the princess's serene beauty. They decided, in silence, not to wake her. Curious and enchanted, the 7 dwarfs watched Snow White sleep, eagerly awaiting the dawn to unravel the mystery of the beautiful stranger in their home. The first rays of morning sunlight invaded the little house, waking Snow White from her restful sleep. Confused, she looked around, realizing that she was no longer in the dark forest, but in a small, cozy room. A sound of low voices made her jump. Sitting on the bed, she saw 7 little men with long beards and curious eyes watching her. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, Snow White asked, "Who are you, and how did I end up here?" Master, stepping forward, replied kindly, "We are the 7 dwarfs, and this is our home. We found you sleeping and were enchanted by your beauty." Snow White, feeling safe in their friendly gaze, told her sad story, from the evil queen's envy to the cruel order given to the huntsman and his desperate escape through the forest. The dwarves listened intently, their faces expressing both sympathy and indignation. When he finished, Master said, "Stay with us, Snow White. If you take care of our house, cook, tidy, and keep everything in order, we will give you shelter and protection. We will be like family." A smile lit up Snow White's face. Grateful and relieved, she accepted the dwarves' offer. So Snow White started a new life in the little house in the forest. While the dwarfs set off for the mines each morning, singing happily, Snow White took care of the house, preparing delicious meals, keeping everything clean and tidy, and filling the dwarfs' home with joy and warmth. A routine was established, and happiness, although fragile, began to blossom in that magical corner of the forest. In the distant castle, the evil queen savored her imaginary victory. Certain that Snow White was dead and buried, she returned to her magic mirror with a smug smile. In front of the flickering crystal, with an air of triumph, she uttered the fateful question, "Magic mirror, my mirror, is there anyone more beautiful than me?" Silence hung in the air for a moment, tense and charged. Then the voice from the mirror echoed, not with the expected flattery, but with a cutting coldness. "My queen, you are beautiful, it is true. But beyond the 7 mountains in the house of the dwarfs, Snow White still lives, and she is 1,000 times more beautiful." A shock ran through the queen's body like lightning. The color drained from his face, replaced by a flush of fury. His eyes, once calculating, now blazed with uncontrollable rage. She clenched her fists, feeling the hunter's betrayal and her stepdaughter's lingering beauty like daggers in her heart. The mirror, undaunted, reflected his image distorted by anger, showing the true ugliness that resided in his soul. The news that Snow White was still alive, and more beautiful than ever, was a devastating blow to the queen's inflated ego. The obsession with perfect beauty, which consumed her day and night, turned into an insatiable thirst for revenge. From that moment on, The queen would not rest until she eliminated Snow White, whatever the cost. The forest, which she believed to be the princess's tomb, would become the scene of new and even more dangerous confrontations. Driven by blind hatred, the evil queen locked herself in her secret laboratory. There, among flasks and cauldrons, he prepared potions and magical powders, devising a new plan to eliminate Snow White. Cunningly, he decided to use his powers of disguise, transforming his appearance to deceive the princess. Before long, the queen emerged from the laboratory, unrecognizable. In the form of an old street vendor, with a wrinkled face and a forced smile, she carried a basket full of bright, colorful ribbons. With slow, hesitant steps, like an elderly and harmless lady, she set off towards the forest, towards the dwarf's house. When he arrived at the little house, he found Snow White at the door, sweeping the floor. "Good morning, young lady," said the disguised queen, her voice trembling and sweet. "I have beautiful ribbons, perfect for your hair." Snow White, naive and kind, was happy with the visit. Admiring the colorful ribbons, she chose a vibrant red silk bow. The queen, smiling mischievously inwardly, offered to tie the ribbon in the princess's hair. As she fastened the bow around Snow White's delicate neck, the queen tightened it tightly, revealing her true intention. The bewitched noose strangled the princess, taking away her heir. Snow White, choked and surprised by the betrayal, fell unconscious to the floor, the beautiful red bow now an instrument of evil. Believing she had finally gotten rid of Snow White, the evil queen returned to the castle, jubilant. However, his joy was short-lived. When she consulted the magic mirror again, the cruel truth hit her like a bucket of cold water. Snow White still lived. The queen's anger reignited, even more intense than before. She needed to be smarter, more ruthless. This time, the queen chose a different disguise. She transformed into a comb seller, with a colorful apron and a basket full of shiny combs. Among them, one comb in particular, decorated with shining stones, was the most dangerous of all, poisoned with a potent and silent poison. Again, the queen went to the dwarf's house. When he arrived, he knocked on the door, calling for Snow White. The princess, still shaken by the incident with the ribbon, hesitated to open it. Remembering the dwarf's warning not to speak to strangers, she asked from behind the door, "Who is there, and what do you want?" "I'm just a poor saleswoman, my dear," replied the disguised queen, in a soft and convincing voice. "I have wonderful combs for sale. Open the door. Don't be afraid." Snow White's curiosity and kindness overcame her caution. She opened the door, finding the smiling old lady with her basket of shiny combs. Trusting the saleswoman's harmless appearance, Snow White agreed to try one of the beautiful combs on her hair. As soon as the poisoned comb touched her golden strands, the poison acted quickly. Snow White felt a pang in her head. Her eyes clouded, and once again, she fell to the ground, unconscious, a victim of the queen's relentless evil. Frustrated and furious with her failed attempts, the queen realized she needed a foolproof plan. Snow White's beauty was a persistent barrier, and envy consumed her completely. In her dark laboratory, immersed in ancient books and mysterious ingredients, she devised a new strategy, the most dangerous and definitive of all. This time, the evil queen dispensed with partial disguises. Using powerful black magic, she transformed herself into an elderly peasant woman, with humble features and a countenance curved by time. Your last asset would be an apple, but not an ordinary apple. This one would be special, carefully poisoned, half red and tempting, half pale and sinister. The red part, dipped in a numbing poison, would induce a deep sleep, so deep that it would resemble death. With the fatal apple hidden in a basket, the queen, in her peasant form, walked to the dwarf's house for the third time. He found Snow White sitting in the doorway, thinking. "Good afternoon, gentle young man," greeted the queen, her voice hoarse and tired. "What a hot day. Would you like to taste this apple? It's a gift from my harvest." Snow White, thirsty and feeling a little hungry, looked at the apple. It glowed in shades of red and yellow, looking incredibly succulent. Kindness spoke louder than caution. "Thank you, ma'am," replied Snow White, accepting the fruit. "It looks delicious." "That's right," assured the queen, with a mischievous gleam in her eyes disguised by wrinkles. "But you need to eat it all, to enjoy it properly." Snow White lifted the apple to her lips and bit the bright red part. At the same moment, the poison acted. His eyes lost their shine, his eyelids grew heavy, and the apple fell from his hand. Her delicate body fell lifelessly to the forest floor. The evil queen, observing her completed work, let out a macabre laugh, pleased to have finally silenced Snow White's beauty forever. The sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, as the 7 dwarves returned from the mine, singing their work songs. Joyfully, they approached the little house, looking forward to dinner and spending time with Snow White. However, the door was ajar, and an unusual silence hung in the air. As they entered, the scene they encountered silenced their songs and joys. Snow White lay on the floor, pale and still, the poisoned apple beside her. A scream of horror echoed through the small house. The dwarves ran to her, calling her name, trying to wake her, but it was useless. The princess seemed to have fallen asleep forever. Sadness invaded the dwarves' home like a dense shadow. They cried and mourned the loss of their beloved Snow White, the young girl who had brought light and happiness into their lives. For 3 days they watched over her body, without the courage to bury her in the darkness of the earth. Finally, they built a transparent crystal coffin so that they could continue to admire its beauty even in apparent death. They placed her inside, adorned with flowers, and took the coffin to the top of the mountain, where they watched over her day and night. One day, a charming prince, riding through the forest, passed the dwarf's house and saw the crystal coffin on the top of the mountain. Curious, he approached, and upon seeing Snow White sleeping in her glass bed, he was transfixed by her ethereal beauty. She was the most beautiful young woman his eyes had ever beheld. Deeply touched, the prince asked the dwarves, with kindness and respect, to let him carry the coffin, promising to take care of it as if it were the most precious jewel. The dwarves, with heavy hearts, agreed to the prince's request. They followed the funeral procession to the valley, watching the prince and his servants carry the crystal coffin. As they descended the mountain, one of the porters tripped over a protruding root. The coffin shook, and the sudden movement caused a piece of the poisoned apple, stuck in Snow White's throat, to be expelled. At the same moment, Snow White opened her eyes. A rosy glow returned to her cheeks, and she took a deep breath, as if awakening from a long sleep. Surprised and confused, she looked around, seeing the prince kneeling beside her, his eyes fixed on her, radiant with joy. "You're alive!" exclaimed the prince, his voice choked with emotion. "You came back to me!" Snow White, still a little dizzy, sat and listened to the prince tell how he found her, and how her beauty had captivated him. Before long, the prince, in love, declared his love, and asked for Snow White's hand in marriage. With her heart overflowing with happiness, Snow White accepted the request. Meanwhile, in the castle, the evil queen, confident of her final victory, asked the mirror once again, "Magic mirror, mirror of mine, who is now fairer than me?" To her horror, the mirror replied, "My queen, you are beautiful. It is true, but the young queen, Snow White, is 1,000 times more beautiful." Envy and fury consumed the queen, driving her mad. In his rage, he fell into his own poison, meeting his tragic end. Snow White and the prince celebrated a grand wedding, and the 7 dwarves were guests of honor. They lived happily ever after, ruling with wisdom and kindness, radiating inner and outer beauty, reminding everyone of the strength of true love and the reward of kindness. The kingdom's bells tolled happily, announcing the wedding of Snow White and the prince. Folkora dressed in celebration, with colorful banners and flowers adorning every street and castle. People from all corners of the kingdom and distant lands gathered to celebrate the union of the gentle princess and the noble prince. The atmosphere was one of pure joy, a vibrant contrast to the dark times that loomed over the kingdom. In the richly decorated great hall of the castle, the wedding was held with pomp and emotion. Snow White, radiant in a white dress adorned with wildflowers, walked down the aisle with a smile that lit up the room. The prince, his eyes shining with love, waited for her, emanating nobility and happiness. The 7 dwarfs, dressed in their best clothes, occupied a place of honor, their faces overflowing with pride and joy for their beloved Snow White. The archbishop led the ceremony with words that highlighted the kindness and inner beauty of the bride and groom, values that would now guide the kingdom. As they exchanged vows, their voices echoed with sincerity and love, sealing not only a marriage union, but the promise of a prosperous and happy future for Folkora. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as the prince and Snow White were pronounced husband and wife. The banquet that followed was a magnificent celebration, Tables filled with delicacies and fine wines, music and dancing filled the night. Snow White and the prince, at the center of everything, radiated happiness, infecting everyone with their positive energy. Their union was not just a fairy tale come true, but the symbol of a kingdom united by the hope, kindness, and beauty that emanated from its new rulers. The royal honeymoon was brief, as the prince and Snow White were eager to begin ruling Folkora together. Shortly after the wedding festivities, messengers arrived at the castle bearing troubling news from a neighboring kingdom, Eldoria. A mysterious plague had spread across the lands of Eldoria, devastating crops and sickening people and animals. The king of Eldoria, desperate, asked for help from Folkora, a kingdom known for its prosperity and wisdom. Snow White and the prince heard the plea with compassionate hearts. "We cannot turn our backs on the suffering of our neighbors," said Snow White, her voice thick with worry. "Our kindness must extend beyond our borders." The prince readily agreed, admiring his wife's generosity. They called upon the kingdom's sages and healers to find a solution. After much deliberation, they decided to send food supplies and medicinal herbs to Eldoria. Snow White insisted on personally leading the relief party, accompanied by the prince and a group of volunteers, including some of the dwarves eager to help. The journey to Eldoria was arduous, and what they found there was even more heartbreaking than they expected. The plague had left a trail of suffering and despair. Snow White and the prince, with their gentle presence and comforting words, inspired hope and confidence. They worked tirelessly, distributing supplies, caring for the sick, and searching for the cause of the plague. Snow White's kindness and inner beauty shone brightly amid the darkness of Eldoria, rekindling the flame of hope in troubled hearts. With the help of folklore's healers and the determination of the people of Eldoria, the cause of the plague was discovered. Waters contaminated by a rare poisonous herb, blooming due to an unusual climate change. Once the source was identified, measures were taken to purify the water and treat the sick with an antidote prepared from Folkora's medicinal herbs. Slowly but surely, Eldoria began to recover. The plantations began to flourish again, health returned to the people, and joy replaced despair. The king of Eldoria, deeply grateful, offered valuable gifts to Snow White and the prince, but they refused, explaining that the greatest reward was to see Eldoria restored to health and prosperity. When they returned to Folkora, they were received like heroes. The people celebrated not only the success of the mission in Eldoria, but the demonstration of kindness and leadership by their rulers. Snow White and the prince had proven that true beauty lies in compassionate action and the radiance of inner kindness. Under the reign of Snow White and the prince, folklife flourished like never before. Justice and kindness guided their decisions, prosperity was shared, and the beauty of the kingdom reflected the beauty of the hearts of its rulers. The mantra, "I radiate kindness and inner beauty," it has become more than a phrase. It was the essence of life in Folkora. And so, Snow White and the prince lived long, happy years, ruling with wisdom and love, leaving a legacy of peace, harmony, and beauty that would echo for generations, proving that true magic lies in the kindness that radiates from the inside out, illuminating the world around.